Well, Britain has some recent experience of a hung parliament after that country's election in May delivered no clear-cut verdict. It's been 100 days since the Liberal Democrats agreed to join forces with their political foes, the Conservatives, allowing David Cameron to take the keys to number 10 Downing Street. The resulting government has needed compromises on both sides of politics, and that's led to allegations from the left and the right that the decision to form the union was driven by little more than political expediency. Europe correspondent Emma Alberici reports from London.
After the birth of his baby girl Florence Rose, David Cameron is taking paternity leave from his job as Prime Minister of Britain. While he's away, standing in his place at the dispatch box is Nick Clegg, the leader of the Liberal Democrats, the third force in British politics.
Thank you very much.
He finds himself in a position few ever thought a Liberal Democrat would get an opportunity to hold. The centre-left socialist is now Deputy Prime Minister in a coalition with the centre-right Conservative Party.
Considering we've just not had coalition governments in the UK, it's been remarkable, firstly, at how quickly the coalition came together, and then how it seems to have survived the first 100 days.
Mark Oaten is the former Home Affairs spokesman for the Liberal Democrats, but resigned from the party before the May election. He thinks the coalition between two such ideologically opposing parties is doomed to failure.
This isn't like a marriage where perhaps you take a marriage vow and you hope to live sort of till you're in your 80s together, because it's about political parties, and political parties are about opposing views, and of course we have an election every 5 years where parties have to oppose each other. So self-evidently coalitions will nearly always break down as those parties start to reassert themselves and fight each other again as separate parties in elections.
On May the 6th, a little more than 100 days ago, Britain gave the Conservatives the most votes and the most seats, but they were still around 20 seats short of an overall majority. With 69 seats of their own, that's where the Liberal Democrats came in as kingmakers. So after 5 days of tense negotiations and political paralysis here, Nick Clegg ostensibly anointed David Cameron as Prime Minister.
I mean, you know, they made the point back in 1992.
Images from the election campaign continue to haunt Nick Clegg. Here he is, standing in front of a ticking tax bomb. This was his message to voters. Don't back the Conservatives or you'll get higher taxes. But that was then, and this is now. And after some mutual backslapping, Nick Clegg is now busy trying to sell the same Conservative policies he campaigned against just 4 months ago.
One of the things about coalitions is that there has to be compromise. Look, the government was selected not necessarily by the politicians, but by the electorate. The electorate called a draw, and they said to the politicians, actually, you've got to come together and sort this out. And that's meant that both Lib Dem and Conservative politicians have had to compromise. And yeah, it's been tough, but it's been tough for the Conservatives as well. You know, they've had to make major changes to their position on, for example, electoral reform.
Mark Oaten has written a book on coalition governments. Its central thesis is that they don't work. The one obvious difference in Australia is, of course, that there are not two parties negotiating here together, but potentially 5 or 6 differing views trying to come together.
Australia is facing, I think, the nightmare coalition scenario. I think there's quite an interesting parallel between what's happening in Australia and in Italy, for example. Not one of the best coalition examples we have. In Italy, small individual parties and individual MPs, mavericks, often set the agenda. For example, there's a strong anti-abortion party, and they've been setting the agenda demanding changes in abortion law. There's even a pensioners party with just 3 MPs, and they've been telling the government what to do on pensions, setting the agenda. And I think there's a real parallel between some of these individual independents and mavericks and small parties in Australia having much, much more power than they really should have in these situations. And that could be quite dangerous. It's made Italy unstable, and it could be a problem for Australia.
Britain's respected Institute of Fiscal Studies now says the coalition's plans to raise taxes and rein in spending is unfair on the poorest households. This has rankled the wider Liberal Democratic Party, whose campaign manifesto was about fairness for all Britons. Nick Clegg faces some tough questions as he prepares to convince his party at their annual conference next month that it was a good idea to join forces with the Conservatives. Emma Alberici, Lateline.